Hello and welcome to our discussion on topic 3. And that's week 3 if you're taking the 16-week version of the course, or the second week if you're taking the 8-week. So, jumping straight in, our agenda, we'll be going over AI and human interactions. So, human AI interactions, and then also discuss user-centric design principles. So, human AI interactions, what is that about? And if you think about the evolution of human computer interaction, we started off kind of with this field called human factors. Then we moved into kind of a human computer interaction. User experience kind of built upon that to help design how we interact with computers, what that looks like, what that feels like, and then leading us to the current potentially area that we're going into of human AI interaction. So the basic idea is that rather than focusing on just a simplistic version of the computer, we assume that it's going to be an intelligent or attempting to be intelligent device. Back in early days, back around this time of HCI, we had this kind of branch that occurred. During that branch, the choice was made to move towards a human as users mindset. That was kind of a collective approach that the industry took. Alternative to that, there was an investigation into this concept of human augmentation, essentially making us better by interacting with technology, be it having it physically implanted inside of us or working with device or apps, but very much about it being an extension of the human being versus us just being users of those systems. One of the challenges, though, that you face when you talk about things like human AI interaction, especially from a design perspective, is it's not easy. And the reason it's not easy is because sometimes AIs cannot say what they can or can't do. They may not know the limitations of their abilities. They could have put the designers of the systems put some guardrails in place to attempt to keep the user or the user from going and asking the AI to do things it can't. But generally speaking, they may not know. And in part, that's the beauty of kind of this generalization of intelligence is that it may be that a system can do something that you didn't really imagine it being used for. Uh, and also, you've got to really think about the implication that data has on design feasibility. The data, as much as it is similar to machine learning, is part of the process. It's not just something that is used to use after something has been developed and designed. It is actually intrinsic to the creation of that thing. So it's important to make sure that we're keeping track of the data, knowing what's being done to the data, and also knowing if the data is sufficient to enable us to do a particular activity or a task. It's also difficult to map from existing designs to an AI use. It may not be as easy as just sticking a button in that says generate something. It could be a full re-engineering effort, especially to make it to where it's a holistic and truly submersive and inclusive sort of experience. And also, AI-based systems can adapt to users and evolve. That can be good and that can be bad. In situations where we've seen chatbots that were released into the world without proper restrictions on what they would be exposed to, could become very poisoned rather quickly. So we have to be very careful about how that AI-based adoption is going and how that evolution is occurring. And prototyping can be challenging. Sometimes it's a question of what's the difference between the prototype and the finished version, because it at the point that you've done the work with the data, built the interfaces as whatever they might be, how far away are you from it being releasable? It may be just a question of packaging and scaling out. Here's 18 guidelines for human AI interaction. As with most things, these are just kind of rules of thumb. But there's some pretty good stuff here. So make clear what the system can do. That's back to knowing the boundaries of what you can and cannot do. Make clear how well the system can do what it can do. So accuracy. Understand that anytime you deal with AI based systems, almost always, there's a few exceptions here and there, but almost always, you're going to have error. You're going to have a percentage of time that the results are not correct. It is one of those things that will occur. That's why we always talk about confidence or probability of success and so on. Uh, so time services are based on context. Context is essential in every element of designing for human AI interaction. You need to know the context, and as much context as you know, the better. So more is better, and show contextually relevant information. Again, know the context, and within the context that a particular user is in, show what is relevant for that situation, for that location, if you will, and then match to relevant social norms. And this is basically making the AI don't break too many of our social etiquette rules. As humans, we have a way that we like to interact. There is typically example being it's rude to typically interrupt someone while they're speaking. So we don't particularly like it if an AI were to do that to us, or if it was terse. We want it to respond to us in something that feels like a warm and compelling tone. And then you want to mitigate social biases. We want our solutions to be fair and unbiased and inclusive. Support efficient invocation. We don't want them to be terribly expensive to run, is essentially what that's saying. So you want to spend time thinking of how many parameters do you actually need to know at inference time to make a good sort of response, and less is better as a general rule from that regard. And that's also the challenge of balancing between the better context you have, the better you can be, but the higher the context, the potentially higher invocation cost involved. And then support efficient dismissal. We like to stop them sometimes. If you're talking to an AI, and that's the exception to the rule, we would like the AI to be polite to us, but we don't have a problem of telling a chatbot to stop the path it's going down. Support efficient correction, because there will be times that things aren't correct. And part of what we want to do when we're building these kind of solutions is always build in some form of a feedback loop so that you can improve things over time. You want to scope the service when in doubt. So basically, pull in the reins, pull in the things that you're going to try to do so that you don't attempt to do more than you can successfully. Make clear why the system did what it did. So try to make it explainable as much as possible, understanding that that can be quite challenging. However, a good example is if the system decided to restrict the scope of what it was attempting to do, it would be good to tell the user that it did so and why it did so. Remember recent interactions. That's kind of part of that context. Don't make me start again explaining my problem to you as a system. Remember it, piece it together, build a holistic view of the thing I'm trying to accomplish over time. And then learn from user behavior. So if a users that are consistently doing a certain thing in response to what the system is doing, maybe take a look at that, because it could need some adjustment. Update and adapt cautiously, and this is part of that being careful of both overcorrecting and being potentially poisoned by bad input, and also in general being very careful to decide that something is a truth and so on. And then encourage granular feedback, so very specific types of feedback about what you got right and what you didn't from an AI's perspective, and then convey the consequences of user action. So make sure that it's clear the user understands what will happen in response to the choices or the decisions that they make in a given situation. And then also provide some global controls so that you can not have to adjust things in individual locations, and then notify the users about any kind of changes that come about. Again, the citations down there in the bottom left-hand corner Definitely a good paper to take a look at. But as I just kind of, you could glean from those list of rules or guidelines, is that context is relevant and central. And it also comes from this whole concept of user centric design, which is about environment. And we'll talk about that shortly. Frameworks can help. So you want to include some sort of a pattern, such as co-creator framework for interaction design, human AI collaboration, and so on. So basically, the idea of a framework is that it should provide someone addressing something new to them, good advice that's been learned from by having others having done the similar sort of thing. So when we talk about user-centric design, we can talk about kind of it from these three pillars. And you think of it in terms of users, environments, and tasks. And we'll talk more about this in a separate video, but the basic idea here is that users are trying to accomplish something in a certain environment. And if we think of it from that perspective, knowing things about environment, which is likely going to be related to context, is pretty important. So some key principles is that we typically, when we're doing things like user-centric design and in general design, period, we want it to be an iterative process. The team is from different backgrounds as a general rule when we're doing these user-centric design sort of experiences, because you don't want everybody to have the exact same sort of experiences. You don't want a bunch of engineers designing the system. Users are engaged early and at least from a design to development, if not sooner than that. And the user's requirements will drive design, and they will evaluate iteratively those designs. The pattern will look something like this potentially. And this is based upon the usability.gov website, is essentially identify a need, specify the context of use, specify the requirements, produce a design solution, evaluate it, and then determine if it's good enough. And if it is, then stop. Otherwise, repeat the cycle. So it starts with identifying the need. It is iterative. We establish the context. We determine the requirements to meet the need in that context. Come up with a design. Evaluate the design. Stop when it's good enough, basically, and don't over engineer and over design a problem. Here it is from a little bit more of a combination of that plus Agile combined together. So do some Agile sessions, do some task and domain modeling, some critical decision and focal tasks, do some HCI wireframes and tasks, and then talk about a cognitive walkthrough, which is essentially imagining yourself as the user going through the process that you're trying to accomplish. Come up with some prototypes, determine the essential stories, do some physical mock-ups, some virtual mock-ups, and then cognitive walkthroughs and usability analysis, and so on. With that, we'll move on now to user-centered versus human-centered. Very, very similar, obviously, user-centered versus human-centered, and humans generally are the users. But the from those terminologies, those fields, if you will, a user-centered approach takes a technologically driven approach. It is goal-driven, focused on predetermined technical requirements, whereas human-centered design takes a socio-technical view. It's focused on a flexible system, and you want to question normative and traditional uses of technology. So trying to innovate and come up with different approaches to solving the problems. Your key takeaways here is that terminology will evolve. Users are typically humans, although that may or may not always be the case, because there's a world where a user of a system could end up being an AI. Wait for that. I'm sure it's coming. We should consider them as people with a backstory, ethnicity, expectations, emotions, and needs. So, generally speaking, the users, and probably they will be human, but they have a story about them. They have a place where they grew up. They have an ethnic group that they may belong to. They have a certain amount of emotions and needs and expectations, and we should consider those when doing our designs. And in general, it's a good idea in life in general. frankly. So with that, here are the resources that were used during this presentation. Feel free to take a look. These slides will be available to you in the course, so don't try to squint and type. You can get to them a better way. Some additional, okay, these are references and these are the resources. Um, do take a look, worth your time. As always, if you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. Stay safe. We'll talk again soon.